Okay, so in the last video, I talked kind of finished off. We are talking a little bit about how some of the things that you learned in Principles of Marketing, all about the product promotion, price, and place, are utilized, in a broader scheme when you're, developing a new product, pricing a product, promoting that product. So again, trying to give a decent example for that, we're going to go with the Nintendo Switch. So let me just get out of here. And you can see that interesting things about the Nintendo Switch is it's kind of marketed to be kind of pretty family friendly. You see this happy family here, where we might have an Xbox or a PlayStation might be tailored more towards the young male demographic. Nintendo's has always been about, relatively family safe entertainment. It's maybe changed its positioning in the last few years, but it's generally, you've got all these iconic properties such as Mario. It may not be quite as technologically advanced as some of the competitors, but it's generally known to give a good family experience. So that's Nintendo. Okay, so we're going to start talking off a little bit about some of the product and the product decisions involved with this. So I've just kind of taken a little snapshot of the screen to give me a little bit more kind of writing area. So let's just think a little bit about product, but something for, consoles. The first thing that's kind of really important for consoles is we're kind of in a life cycle. And this has become kind of less pronounced over the last few years with kind of more continuous updates in consoles, but generally you would get a new console every 5 to 7 years. So that's kind of saying quite often, the games on the consoles will follow a very similar life cycle, such as Grand Theft Auto as an example. Thinking a little bit about, the branding of the product, we don't want if we design our new Nintendo Switch, we don't want it marketed with lots of like X-rated games because it's not going to fit well with the family kind of centric image. So generally we have, family friendly would be a good kind of almost descriptor of the branding of that. And I'd say it's more positioned as a general console, not really at a specific demographic other than maybe families, so for everyone. But generally it's maybe doesn't quite have some of the high, lacks a little bit of the high-end tech that some of the other consoles have. So, if we're designing a new console, quite often, and again, we're not going to go too much into it. There's a technique called conjoint analysis for product positioning. But we might, for example, have, 4 different Nintendos. One would be, similar to the existing with the kind of the dual screen. Other we would be aiming for a more expensive, aimed more at kind of elite gamers. We might have some sort of a more value design, a more etc. So we come up with a few different kind of concepts for our different products, and then we would pick one based on our marketed research. Now, I do want to mention something called perceptual mapping. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, and I'll give another example when we do segmentation. But we'd maybe want to look a little bit like, our brand image relative to the competitors. So we'd maybe, based on survey with consumers, we'd have something like maybe quality, or maybe something like, the level of tech. And maybe we instead of quality, let's just have brand image. Let's just have family friendly. So we'd have Nintendo down here, very family friendly with moderate tech. And we'd have maybe, I can't really differentiate. I think the Xbox is maybe a little bit less family friendly, but it's got a higher tech. So we'd put maybe the Xbox here and the PlayStation here. They're really, Xbox and PlayStation are really competing almost in the same market. And that would be, I mean, there's not many players in the market, so this is a pretty boring perceptual map. And generally, if you're doing this sort of mapping, you would be looking at more than 2 dimensions. But that's just an example of a very simple perceptual map. Okay, so let's kind of go back. Let's get rid of that. And let's go back to our next one. Is we're thinking a little bit about place and distribution channels. So let me just do my usual snip. And what we're going to do is we're going to think a little bit about place. Now, I know we tend to have a few supply chain management majors in this class, less than we used to. But I mean, you think about this for the console. You know, if we run out of stock, in like the Christmas, like the holiday period, this is a major issue. As you know, the model for gaming has gone more towards online services and subscribing to multiplayer online games. You know, we've got to think about the positioning of things like worldwide positioning of servers. We'd need to think quite strongly about our supply chain. You know, most of our product may be built in China or East Asia, so we need to ensure that we have, you know, an efficient way of getting, you know, raw materials to our production, to the finished market. And once we have our product, you know, how do we distribute? Do we aim, you know, do we build relationships? Do we have it, you know, our console, sorry, Nintendo in stores? You know, buy direct with, let's say, Amazon. You know, how do we, maybe we have limited stock. How do we distribute it to all these different outlets? How do we promote to these different outlets? How do we design our pricing strategy for all these different outlets? So there's quite, and again, we won't cover too much of that in this class. A lot of that will be more in your supply chain classes. We will be focusing more on things like the product and the promotion. The place and distribution really is kind of, it used to be more of marketing, but it's kind of been taken over a little bit more by supply chain management. Okay, so let's kind of move on. The next thing we need to think about is a little bit about promotion. So again, let's do the same as before. And, you know, for Nintendo, as we're probably trying to sell web services, we'd need to think of the media balance. So let's just put promotion for Nintendo. You know, we've got the media balance. We traditionally have, maybe we'd have traditional print media. You know, TV adverts, which streaming. Maybe, you know, online banner ads. You know, target is the people who are going to be interested in, we think, Nintendo's or even retargeted to people who've shown some interest in the past. So we have all these different methods of promotion. The one thing I would say is, this is why sometimes academic marketing textbooks are out of date, because media consumption, even in the older generations, is changing very quickly. I think it was this week we were talking about, the Iowa caucuses and saying, how media consumption has changed even since the last election, that just sending out lots of TV ads is nowhere near as effective as it used to be. And particularly for a tech product such as a console, we need to get a good balance. I mean, we may want, TV adverts are still pretty useful, maybe a Super Bowl ad or something for building up brand awareness. But if we want to kind of close and offer promotions, coupons, etc., then we'd be going more towards kind of meetup, online banner ads. Sorry, I need to still have my my email on in case anybody kind of comes into my online office hours. Okay, so that's just a little bit about promotion. We need to be able to kind of measure how well the promotion is working. So things like, when we could have a lab experiment, people will be shown can't spell laboratory, never mind. In a laboratory experiment, people will be shown the adverts, and maybe advert A and advert B, kind of what we call A/B testing, and then see which has the more effective advert in terms of attitudes of the brand. Obviously, we'd be looking at things like sales, from certain promotions, maybe click-throughs from adverts, if somebody clicks on our advert and eventually buys. Looking maybe a survey of brand awareness. So there's lots of different ways that we can kind of measure the effectiveness of our different promotions. Okay, so kind of continuing on from there, the next one is the final little bit about kind of the marketing mix. We're going to talk a little bit about price. So again, let's just do a little snip here. When we're thinking about price and when we're thinking about pricing profit, at heart, there's kind of a profit-loss model, at heart with pricing. Sorry. We have a profit-loss model. We have something like profit equals, I know you loved your intro economics class, but something like demand times, your price minus the marginal cost. Minus the fixed costs. We need to think about, competitors. We'd be looking at, how is PlayStation, Xbox, how do they price their products? We'd also look at kind of the mode of the pricing. Are we going to charge for kind of, a subscription service? Are we going to give like a cheap console? And subscription service? So quite often what we do is we'd maybe sell the console at, maybe less than it would cost us, but we'd include maybe the first year of subscription service cheap, and most of the games people need, online games, are part of that subscription service. And, then most of our revenue will come from that kind of additional games, additional services. So we need to think of that model. A lot of kind of modern market is to try and bring consumers into your particular infrastructure and get continuing revenue from those consumers. I'll give you a similar example. If you think about airlines, they're all trying to get you to get their credit cards. You get a lot of additional benefits with those credit cards, better seating, discounts on flights, etc., free flights. And it's all about trying to get you more brand loyal. So it's kind of very similar, kind of very similar here. And we also think, a little bit about the kind of, I'll just continue up here, the product cycle. If we have a console at the start of the product cycle, and product cycles usually go something like this, we'll start having time and then sales. We start with only very, obviously if we have an established console, it's a little bit different, but we start with the early adopters and then more and more and more people have it, and then eventually it will tails off. So if we think a little bit about maybe smartphones, this kind of happened. It's what's called an S-shaped curve. You get people adopting early, then you kind of get the majority, and then you get the laggards. So when you're kind of new and innovative, you can kind of charge a little bit more at the beginning of the cycle. We also maybe think a little bit about, psychological pricing. Things like, do we have 0.00 or 0.99? We'd look at maybe, how people perceive different promotion strategies. Not really that applicable for this particular example, but also very important is things like dynamic price. If we're in things like the airline industry, dynamic pricing. As you run out of product, you run out of airline seats, you can begin to raise your prices. That's maybe not such a good idea for consoles to, if you have a shortage, to suddenly double your prices. But in a lot of industries, this is kind of very important. Okay, so we went through an example. I tried to keep it general, but I wanted to give things specific to the example of the Nintendo. And we looked at how the 4Ps can affect, our marketing research efforts. Okay.